What's going on, family? Welcome to another episode of Family by Heart. As promised, we got some new episodes kicking in here, including today we have a guest, Mr. Simon Benn. He runs a podcast called Thriving Adoptees. And as you'll hear me talk about in the interview, he's over 170 episodes strong, a lot of great resources, interviews that he's covered in his podcast, and one I definitely suggest checking out. He was adopted very early in life, but really didn't start getting into the adoption world and how it affects people until really as he got into his 40s and past then. And so we talk a little bit about that, how he got involved, how he started his podcast. And he was a really gracious and wonderful guest. I had to pause a few times because my kids that were supposed to be sleeping woke up from their naps early and kind of came in or interrupted. And he was gracious enough to be patient and allow me to help get them situated. So I thank him again for his time. And I thank you for tuning in and checking out this podcast. Again, it's Simon Benn with Thriving Adoptees podcast. Enjoy. We're born into our names, but we become family by heart. I'm Dustin Gruss, public speaker and family transition coach. When my wife and I found out in the beginning of 2016 that we weren't going to be able to have our own biological children just 7 months into our marriage, we were shook. Little did we know what lied ahead through our journey of infertility, foster care, and where we are now, having recently adopted our two beautiful boys. What we do know is every little bit of help we got along the way was priceless. And that's what we can expect with this podcast. Stories of inspiration and resources to lead you through that journey. From the heartbreak of infertility to the hope and blessings that come with foster care and adoption. We may have different stories, backgrounds, and names, but we're all family here. This is Family by Heart. What's going on, family? Welcome to another episode of Family by Heart. I'm your host, Dustin Gruss. I'm very excited for our guest today, as he is a podcaster over from the UK, and he has a podcast that's over 170 episodes strong, and it is about adoption families and adoptees thriving in their new environment or in their life, really. And so without further ado, Simon Benn, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Dustin. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm literally off the back of recording two podcasts myself as host, so I'm looking forward to putting a different hat on and being a guest and a resource for you and your listeners today. So totally excited.
Well, we're excited to have you, so thank you so much. And speaking of that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Because I know from our pre-interview talk last week, you said you started out being a guest on a bunch of podcasts. What led you to start doing that? And then what led you then to starting your own podcast, which again is over 170 episodes strong. I believe I just checked before we came on, and you just released 176 today.
Right. Yeah. So what led me to be a guest? Well, that's a long story. I guess I learned a load of stuff about who we are, how our feelings and thoughts work, and how we thrive. I learned a load of stuff and decided that I wanted to share it with other people. And I tried, over a period of about 10 years, I tried different things. And eventually I decided to come into the adoption world and see if I could make a difference there. The first thing that I thought about how I could do that was sharing my story and sharing my learnings on adoption podcasts. That was November 2020, I think. I started doing that. I really enjoyed it. And I was talking to a mentor of mine probably 4 months later, and I was sharing that I've been doing it and that I enjoyed it. And she said to me, "It's time to do your own podcast, Simon." And initially I said, "No, I can't do the editing. I don't know what I'm doing." I had loads of reasons not to do it. And she said, "Simon, just do it." And I still resisted. And then she said, "Simon, just do it." And then I went, "Okay, I'll do it." And that's what I started doing straight away. And I found that I loved guesting. Sorry, I loved hosting as much as I loved guesting. So
Nice. I mean, you must, because again, if you started out being a guest in 2020, here we are midway through 2022, and you're already 170 episodes deep, 176 to be exact. Like, that's a lot of content, a lot of guests, a lot of interviews that you've been doing, and here you are still having time for the little guys that are just, you're, I think, going to be episode 12 on this podcast for me. So the fact that you're just cranking out that information, everything, that's awesome, and that you are doing something that you love and doing it to have an impact on the adoption world. So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you. I love having the conversations, and I'm pretty full on. And the quality of the conversations is more important to me than anything else. I just happen to be throwing myself into this hook, line, and sinker to make a difference in the world. And also, I realized that I've got my perspective, but what I wanted to do with my podcast was share as many different perspectives and share as many different learnings as I possibly could. And you said you contacted me through some kind of podcasting host swapping
Networking
conversation thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just said yes. I would have said yes if you hadn't done any episodes. I would have said yes if you'd done 200. It's the quality of the conversation and the relationships that I build with people, and the quality of the people that I seem to converse with. That just gladdens my heart and makes my day. So that's why I do it.
Absolutely. And I really enjoyed our pre-interview conversation, because not only did you and I give each other some more resources and nuggets to look into, other people to contact and interview, but just our conversation there was pretty deep that I was like, man, we should have been recording that. So hopefully we'll recreate some of that magic here and stuff but you're someone that's very easy to talk to, and hopefully you feel likewise. So I'm looking forward to continuing on this podcast and continuing on. Maybe we'll continue to interact over the years as both of our podcasts grow, and just see where we're at in different stages of everything.
I hope so. I hope so, my friend. And it is about the magic, right?
Yeah.
Things change magically.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not about the psychology. It's not about the trauma. It's about the magic that gets us past the trauma, gets the magic past the logistics. And so, let's create some magic.
Absolutely. Now, it seems like each season or a number of episodes that you do kind of in a row, they seem to have a theme sometimes behind them, like the different type of guests, like their backgrounds that they come from. They seem to have a common thread. But what would you say your main goal behind your podcast was at the beginning of when you launched it, and has it evolved over time with all the guests and different backgrounds, practices, and belief systems that they've brought to your podcast?
Okay. First off, I noticed I did do a kind of like a string of 3 podcasts, 3 episodes from different coaches. other than that, I haven't really been aware of any themes. So that's an interesting one. Has my objective changed? No.
Okay.
My objective has always been about interviewing guests to find out what they've learned about how adoptees thrive to help adoptive parents and adult adoptees listening. I don't think that that's changed since I started it. Probably one thing that has changed is I had in my mind a kind and in the early episodes it was 20. I had this notion in my head about being 80-20. So this Pareto's law thing that some Roman Latin guy discovered ages ago. 20% story and 80% learnings. And I'd say now that I've shifted that on, and I would say that I want the podcast to be maybe 5% story and 95% learnings. So my frame, where I'm always coming from, is what have you learned that you want to share with others, and it's learnings first, and the learnings. The stories are embedded in the learnings rather than the learnings being embedded in the stories.
That's definitely a deep way to look at it. And we're definitely going to get to the learning side of thing. I would like to dive into your story a little bit more because I think a big part, again, why you do this is from your story and the lessons you learned along the way. So you were adopted at 5 weeks old.
Correct.
At what age did your parents tell you that you were adopted?
I was so young I don't even remember being told. I've known for as long as I can remember. So I'm guessing 1.5. My parents adopted my little sister when I was just before I was 2, actually. So I'm going to ask my mum, actually. I'll be speaking to her later. So I'm going to ask her, when did you tell me? I do know how they told me. So they told me with a storybook. And it was a story of a couple that fell in love, got married, bought a house together, and adopted to. I think they got some pets, and then they adopted some kids. So it normalized. Obviously, this is in this. Well, not obviously, but I'm 50. So I didn't say I'm 55, right? So this is in the 60s. I was adopted in early February 67. So the book would be pretty dated by now, but it normalized. It made what is an abnormal way of growing a non-usual way of growing a family into something that was normalized, so that there was no shame in it. So that's how they told me.
One, do you remember the name of the book? Even though it's kind of old.
It's out of print. I think it's called Mr. Fairweather and His Family. I think it's called that.
Mr. Fairweather. Okay.
But I think it's out of print.
I have to check around Amazon or eBay or something for that afterwards. So, did you and your family have celebrate what's known as sometimes as a gotcha day at all, like the day that you were adopted, or it was just kind of your normal birthdays and that was it?
Birthdays and that was it.
Okay, because I know I had some friends growing up that had gotcha days, and we recognize our gotcha day with our kids, although we haven't gotten to the 1 year anniversary of it yet, as far as their official adoption. But that's something I just recall growing up with a friend that he never had perfect attendance at school because his parents always pulled him from school on his gotcha day, on their adoption day, and they went out to amusement parks or movies, or they just had a big day out together. And I just always thought that was pretty cool. Now, you say the book kind of normalized adoption for you. Did you grow up with any prejudices or stigma attached to you because you were adopted? Did your friends treat you differently, or did other adults, as far as you could tell, treat you differently because you were adopted? Or
Not at
did the
all.
book really normalize it for you?
Well, I'm using the book normalized it for me now. I mean, it was just life, it was,
Mm-hmm.
it was the way that I didn't, it was the way that I saw life. I didn't have, um, I don't have any recollection of any um, tricky stuff around that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think a lot of times, especially here in the United States, a lot of the stigma is attached more to foster kids than it is adopted kids, or I think it's attached more to biracial adoption. Like, I know my wife, because we adopted two black kids, she gets looks when she's out in public with the kids in certain neighborhoods and areas and grocery stores um, that aren't quite as affluent, and she gets stares and looks, whereas I don't really get those. Now, it could be because I'm 6'1" and over 230 pounds, and so people probably don't want to mess with me or say anything to anger me or give me a dirty look, but she sees or experiences that a little bit more, and you hear that a lot more about biracial families because of adoption and stuff. And you'll be surprised, like some of the questions that you sometimes get. Um, I just recently, a few weeks ago, was getting the kids chicken nuggets from a drive-through restaurant, and the girl that was, serving us, like at the drive-through, she was young, and so she probably didn't know much better. But when I told her that, well, yeah, we adopted the boys that are sitting in the back seat, she's like, well, why'd you want to do that? Like, what do you mean? Why? We wanted kids. We wanted to love kids. Like, they're our children. What do you mean? Why did you want to do that? Like, it was just weird, and I don't think she really meant anything by it, but it was still just kind of an odd question.
Yeah,
Um,
I think yeah, people are pretty insensitive, and me too, right? I'm insensitive too. Sometimes I ask some silly questions. Um, I think I was just trying to think, what would I what would I say to you if I saw you, if I didn't know you, right? Well, let's say walking down the
right.
street, a white guy, what do you say, 220 pounds with two
Hmm.
black kids. I think, uh, well, I wouldn't ask you a person. I would think, I would probably find it surprising, actually.
Hmm.
But would I ask you why, if I got into a conversation, would I ask you why? No, I wouldn't ask you why. But, I'm sure that well, I've been called out on being insensitive by a particular friend of mine, or a couple of friends of mine. So I know that I sometimes like that. And I think for me, we're always, most of us, well, we do as well as what's going on for us in the moment, right? And
Hmm.
when we know better, we do better. But most of the time, we don't know what we're doing, do we? We're just like fumbling through life. We're struggling, and
Yeah.
if we're struggling, it shows in our behaviour. And if it's struggling, like a, a, a friend of mine at the moment is struggling, and he's apologised for his behaviour and hopes we can move on. I'm thinking, well, I know you're struggling, buddy. So um, it's okay with me. I can handle it.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, if I haven't really I'm not sure if I've got the guts to say this to him or not, but he needs to get some help. So
Yeah.
I'm quite happy to be his friend, but whether I see him for a longer period of time going forward will depend on whether he changes or not. I don't want. I'm not.
Right.
I don't need an apology from him. I'm hoping that there'll be some change.
Right. Yeah. Actions speak louder than words. So you need more of a change from him than you need an apology.
Yeah, I don't
Because
need
if
an
it's,
apology for him because I know that people are doing, me included, are doing as well as we can, given
mm-hmm.
what's going on for us in the moment. So that's the way life. That's kind of the way life works. And I'm sometimes an idiot too. My wife will
Well,
tell you about that stuff.
and well, and not only is it sometimes what we say can be insensitive or just to loosely use the term ignorant because we don't know any better because we weren't taught or aren't aware, but sometimes it could be the other side, like where maybe someone's not necessarily looking at my wife and the kids that way, or they're not looking at me and the kids that way. It's we're just overly sensitive. So it's a matter of the people, other people being insensitive and us being oversensitive, and that sometimes will create
Yeah,
those conflicts as well. And like I said, I think people are just it's a matter of learning and accepting and um, it's one thing if someone apologizes, great. Like, thank you for the apology. Like, I realize you're in a tough spot. But if it's something that you have to apologize for again and again and again, then you're not, then your apology is less sincere. It's more becoming a matter of your actions, again, speaking louder than your words. And because you're not taking action to correct the thing that you have to keep apologizing for, then we have an issue.
yeah. I mean, yeah, it is. It's just as you were describing the situation and saying a couple of minutes ago, talking about the difference between you and your wife, that the issue of sensitivity did come into my head. I was talking to a guy a couple of weeks ago who's going to be hopefully going to be coming on the podcast. A great guy, and he was talking about how there is we seem to be living in a world where a lot of people are competing to be in terms of how triggered we can be. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So people are looking for reasons, and social media spreads this. So Facebook, the Facebook algorithm knows that anger, angry posts or posts that provoke anger are the ones that spread the fastest, right?
Yeah.
And spread the widest. And what Facebook want is more page views. More page views leads to more revenue, ad revenue, more ad revenue leads to more profit. So
Yeah.
Google made, I don't know Facebook's figures, but I read something over the weekend. Google made 150 billion or 250 billion dollars on ads last year. So that's why this whole thing is it's like an angry race. It's like
Mm-hmm.
it's like an arms race. It's a race to be triggered. It's a competition about how triggered we are. Well, our response is our response, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's whether we react or whether we react in anger or we respond with humility. So I'm not angry about my mate struggling. I'm not angry. Hopefully I'm responding in this instance, right? I'm responding with humility.
Yeah.
But I won't be until I see some change rather than apology, I won't be looking to be spending extended periods of time with it.
Yeah.
I don't
Well,
blame.
as far as the people you have spent time with, especially on your podcast, I'm going to give you a small chance to brag or name drop, being the term here. There are a lot of highly successful and or like famous people that have come out of foster care and or adoption. Who is like the most famous person you've interviewed, and who is someone you've interviewed that you feel has made the largest impact when it comes to the world of adoption? Like,
Um,
who's your white whale that you've had on your
I
podcast so
I
far?
I don't. I wouldn't know where to answer that question. Can I answer a different question?
Absolutely.
So the episode that opened my eyes, uh,
Mm-hmm.
the widest and was the biggest learning for me, was one by an foster adoptive mum of. Sorry, I'm embarrassed to know. She's got loads of kids. She's got 8 or 9 kids, I think. Called Holly Ann Petrie. She she um, uh, she came up with the title for her podcast of "Unpacking Our Own Baggage as
Mm-hmm.
Adoptive Parents," and it really opened my eyes because I had any relationship starts with us.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about I can't influence my wife. I can influence what I do, but I can't influence what my wife does. So it starts with me. So and like emotional intelligence starts with us. It's about how we are, and how we are, who we're being, who we're being, our mood, our outlook, our whole thing. It's about us. It starts with us, and the kids are going to take our lead. So it starts with us, and that's what the lesson that I learned from Holly Ann, and she runs a foster adoption agency, and that was the lesson that landed for her. It was about her and unpacking her own baggage. And when she shared that with me, I thought that is so powerful because it is all about us. And that was last year, and recently this year I interviewed somebody again for the podcast. I'm sorry, I can't remember who it was now. But she said that adoptive parents come to her asking how they can fix their kids. And it's not about fixing the kids, it's about um, us first.
All right. No, those are great answers as far as impactful guests that you've had. That I'm definitely going to check out the podcast of that first woman you mentioned. And between our uh, pre-interview talk last week and then today, like I've gone back and listened to the episodes of people you've mentioned and stuff, and it's again, Thriving Adoptees is like, if you are getting into the world of foster care adoption, like check out Simon's podcast because he's got amazing guests on there, and it's just amazing podcast full of resources. So be sure to check it out. And I kind of had a feeling that was going to be your answer. I was kind of that you were going to say is more about the people that have opened your eyes and made an impact. I had a feeling about you that's going to be. I knew you weren't going to really brag about, okay, this is a famous person. It's someone that really opened your eyes. And those are really the kind of guests that you want to have, are the ones that do open your eyes to different parts of the system. So
Yeah. There's another couple I could name check from my curiosity point of view, and also bearing in mind you and your wife have adopted 2 black kids. The transracial adoption piece, you've mentioned it adds another layer of complexity. There's two fantastic podcasts, one with Isaac Etter, Etter, and Nathan Ross, 2 black transracial adoptees, and their stories and what they have learned and what they've come through. Both, if I remember correctly, out of foster care, and just great episodes. Also, there's Zach from Adoption Star, who runs. I don't know if he's number 1 or number 2 in the agency that his mum founded, another transracial adoptee. So, as a white guy adopted by white parents, I have no lived experience of that issue. So, I'm always trying to bring different learnings, stuff outside of because I think lived experience is the key to opening all this stuff.
Absolutely.
And just to finish off slightly on that, I've recorded 2 podcasts that I've not released, and one of them was just there was no light at the end of the tunnel, and the second one was somebody who was talking in way abstract, organizational, systemic changes, and I kept on trying to bring her around to a more practical and focused approach, and she didn't have the lived experience to be able to talk meaningfully about it. Her stuff was theory, and I don't want theory. I want practice, and I want learnings from real life for my listeners.
Absolutely. Especially as someone who's living the experience, I completely agree with that. All right. So during our pre-interview talk last week, you mentioned that we talked a little bit about trauma, and that you had a traumatic reaction at 40 when you found out your teddy bear was actually from your bio mom. What means did you use to process the trauma, and did it lead to other discoveries about your biological mom?
Well, the first thing is, and I'm not. It may seem like I'm splitting hairs here, but I'm not splitting hairs. So, I found out on my 40th birthday that the teddy bear was from my birth mom, right? And my initial reaction to it was, oh, that's kind of funny. That's kind of strange that they told me that I was adopted, but they didn't tell me that the teddy bear was from my birth mom, right?
No.
When I was talking to my mum about this a few months ago, and she said, "Well, we actually did tell you." So there you are. That's an interesting one. That they did tell me that it's from her, and so yeah, my instant reaction was one of curiosity. I thought that's kind of strange. It wasn't until a couple of months ago when I was talking to a friend of mine about this about the teddy bear that I had this volcanic eruption of anger came out of me, directed towards my birth mother. So what I said was, and I won't swear, but I did swear at the time. She didn't love me enough to keep me. She gave me the teddy bear, and the teddy bear was a consolation prize. So there's two meanings given to the same story, the same fact, right? The same fact. There's two reactions to the same fact, and so now if I look back on this, I will say, bearing in mind I'm 55 now, so this is 15 years ago that this happened. I would say that, and I've never ever quoted Shakespeare before. I don't understand Shakespeare. It's all far too complicated for me. I'm not into that sort of stuff at all. However, he said something like, "Nothing is either good or bad. Only the meaning that we give it makes it so." Right. So, curiosity about not being told about the teddy bear being from my birth mother, and then anger. 2 months later, anger directed towards my birth mother. And so, but I'm really glad that happened, because it kick-started my kind of learning journey and led me to where we are today. So essentially, I had, around that time, I'd finally got to what I thought was some kind of business success, and that had made me happy. And then I figured that maybe adoption had screwed me up, really. So, and I was looking for where my antennae were up, and I was thinking, where am I going to find happiness? And that's kind of what I've been exploring since then, really.
Now, the other thing in that we discussed in the pre-interview was the idea of society being trauma obsessed versus hope obsessed. And so you had an interesting take on that, if you wouldn't mind sharing that ideology.
Yeah. So my business has caused me a lot more upset than trauma. Right? That's just my experience. But the adoption has caused me heartache and trauma, if you want to use that word. When I started believing what I was reading, I'm a sensitive, susceptible kind of a guy. So I take stuff in. I don't question a lot. I'm quite easily influenced, should we say? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I started reading the Primal Wound, and I thought, this explains everything. Mm-hmm. And then I realized a few months later that I didn't believe that the Primal Wound had happened. I didn't believe that I was wounded. I realized that I'd felt wounded, but who I truly am at my essence is unwoundable. And so my that was probably 6-7 years ago when I saw that. When I came into the adoption space doing the podcast, I realized that there was there seemed to be a trauma obsession. And I believe you used the word ideology. I believe that we should be trauma informed and hope obsessed, because we need to know the effects of trauma, and at the same time, we need to realize that adoptees are not their trauma. No person is their trauma. Trauma is, depending on how you view it, something that happened to you, to us, a traumatic event, or it's a feeling that is kind of remembered within us. within our bodies about the traumatic event that happened. But we are not our trauma. We are not what has happened to us. We are, because that's in the past and it's an event. It's not who we are. We are not our feelings, because our feelings come and go. So they're not, as do our thoughts. So they are not essential to us. They are something that we have, not something that we are.
And that's one of the things I love what you said there about we are not our trauma. And one of my past guests talking about foster kids, they aren't foster kids; they are kids in foster care. Is one of the quotes she shared in, and we're not, like thriving adoptees. Like, you are a child, you were an adult that was adopted. You weren't an adopted child. Like, you know what I mean? Like the correlation there, like it's just a part of your story. It's not who you are. It's kind of what you were
Yeah,
getting to in the point there.
none of us are our story. There's a lady that said at the. Have you heard of Byron Katie? People call her Katie. One of her questions is, "Who would we be without our story?" Well, we are not. We're not our story. We're not. We're not what happened to us. But we think we are. Right? Me too. I'm embroiled. I'm hooked into the drama of, for example, how my podcast is doing. Right? I'm hooked. I'm embroiled into that story. I'm consumed by relationships in my life, the stuff that's going on in my head, all these things. But all these things aren't what I am. So to make it really crystal clear, if we're doing this on, if we're going to do this bit on video, just 2 shakes. So if you're listening to this on audio, rather than watching me, you can see I'm holding up a fist, right? Because a lot of adoptive parents tell me that their kids are angry, right? So I'm holding up a clenched fist, and that fist for me is the a symbol of the anger and the trauma and the fear and the desire to lash out, which I've done in the past when I've felt cornered or questioned. I felt that I wanted to lash out. So the fist is the anger, right? And that's the metaphor. That's a metaphor for the trauma. So fist equals trauma in simple terms. Fist is and trauma are traumatic events, traumatic feelings, traumatic thoughts. Trauma is the fist. Inside my fist, as I open it up, you'll see a glass diamond. It ain't a real diamond, because it would be worth about, I don't know, $5 million, 4 million quid,
Right.
who knows? It's a little diamond that I got off Amazon for £7, so about $8.50. And underneath all the trauma, underneath all the traumatic events that we've been through, and so some people might say that adoption is traumatic, right? Or the neglect and hardship that kids have been subjected to before they were in foster care. All the feelings in all of our heads of insecurity and anger, and all the thoughts in our heads that we're not good enough, is the truth of who we are. And the truth of who we are is that diamond. And that's my obsession, is the perfection of who we are. hope obsessed, perfection
Mm-hmm.
obsessed, true identity obsessed, rather than focusing on the trauma.
I love that. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Um, and I think to kind of go with that, like while we're not our story, and it's not necessarily our story shapes us, it's how we react, it's how we find hope that shapes us. It's the actions we take after the trauma, and sometimes we need a little help with that, and finding the hope, and that's nothing wrong with that. And have you seeked help as far as dealing with your emotions as an adult, as things like the teddy bear started to kind of that anger kind of spiked up a couple months after you realized that with the teddy bear, or was it um, or has the podcast been what's helped you process a lot of the uh, what your story was to help
Now,
um, bring you
I've
that
done,
hope and be that
I've done a
diamond?
lot of work. I've done a lot of work on myself, and I continue to do a lot of work on myself. So, uh, or I listen to audiobooks and podcasts whilst I'm walking the dog for an hour and a quarter in the morning, and when I'm ever in the car on my own. So I probably consume about listen to stuff to help me understand who I am an hour and three quarters a day, and
Mm-hmm.
I've done a lot of work on myself over the last 15 years. Yeah, coaching, courses, audiobooks, um, yeah, mentoring. I've done a little bit of therapy. Didn't really work for me. Didn't therapy, because the therapist just wanted to drag me back into the past rather than help me. But I've had a lot of coaching. However, the therapist did lead me to um, a huge step forward, which was tracing my birth mother, um, and who unfortunately I found out eventually she died. But I got my adoption file, and that helped me. There was a letter in that file about the teddy bear, which helped me realize that the story in my head, the story that she didn't love me enough to keep me, was complete and utter rubbish. It was it was 100% fiction, right? Stories, the voice in our head, it's lies. The voice the voice in our head is a liar. Um, but kind of luckily, it's not who we are.
Mm-hmm. Well, you answered one of my next questions there, and I'll wrap it up soon because I've taken a lot of your time, especially with a couple pauses we had to take. But the fact that you did seek out your your birth mom,
I did.
um, have you looked into like any of the other family tree like program stuff to see if there's other family members that you might have, any other biological family? Because my dad actually has we discovered probably about 15 years ago, we met his long lost half sister, and so our family tree grew like a whole big branch, and so now I have these other cousins and uncle and aunt and stuff. That's a lot of fun. So have you explored, or do you have more biological family out there that you've looked
Yeah,
for or gotten to meet? Or
I've I found out that my birth mother had died. I suspected that was the case, but I found out from her brother, so my biological
mm,
uncle. I've swapped a few letters with him. The first letter I got back from him sorry, when I sent, it's a long story. How should I shortcut it? Yeah. I put my phone number and my email and all that sort of stuff on the letter that I sent to him, and I just got I got a letter back a few months later. So I figured he's not really up for the conversation. I did send a letter to a guy who I think is my biological father, and he never responded. So I didn't pursue that. It was never really about him in my head anyway. It was about my biological mum.
All right. So, last two questions. One, from all the people you've interviewed and looked at adoption from different angles, do you see an overall common thread for the adoptees and the adopted families to thrive, to be the thriving adoptees and thriving adoption families? What do you think is like the common thread for, your one suggestion for anyone that's realizing or going through the experience of having adopted someone or someone that was adopted?
Discover who you are. Explore who you are. So it's about it's not about what happened. It's not about what happens to us. It's not about our feelings about what's happened to us. It's not about our thoughts. It's about what's underneath all that. So the diamond rather than the trauma. So understanding who we are, and as a big clue is that we're not the voice in our head that tells us that we're not good enough. Because I've done before I started the podcast, I did all this work that I found very little in any adoption books that gave me any hope whatsoever. I didn't think that adoption was my problem. I thought my problem lay elsewhere. So I studied our feelings and thoughts and all that sort of stuff and identity outside the adoption space. And what I found was that nobody thinks that they're good enough either. So that seems to be the central human part of a central theme of the human condition, that we don't think we're good enough. So we're not good enough because we're adopted, or we're not good enough because we're too fat, we're too thin, we're too tall, we've got ginger hair, we didn't have our own biological kids, we're not a good enough parent. We are a biological parent, but we're still not a good enough parent. Nobody thinks that they're good enough. Everybody, we all believe the voice in our head, and that isn't who we are. You're on the pet subject here, so I'm riffing quite freely on that. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I think that is a perfect answer, and I think there's definitely something for that, even for the bullies or the people that are full of themselves or looking down on other people and stuff. Still, a large part of that comes from insecurities that they are experiencing themselves. So I think that's true, that you have to find who you are and really recognize and celebrate that. And also, I think it's our calling in life to help others that feel lost or are lost, and help them see who they are and celebrate that as well. Help them celebrate and recognize and lift each other up, not bully each other, tear each other down, or impose our will on other people. It's celebrating our uniqueness, our individuality, our heritage, our background, and where we want to go as individuals, as families, as society. It's really just trying to lift each other up and encourage each other. So I think, and it all has to start with discovering who you are, like you said. So I think that's a perfect answer.
So before I came into the adoption space, I did do a lot of work in elementary schools and bullying, and it was all about helping kids be happy, right? And what I discovered was that bullying is the number one cause of kids' unhappiness.
Mm.
And I was bullied badly as a kid. So what bullies make it about us, and therefore we think there's something wrong with us, right?
Mm.
So for me, it was buck teeth, all sorts of different things. Having teeth that stuck out, and other stupid things. Not drinking tea, not being having. So a lot of bullying. A lot of the bullying I suffered was on camp, right? So I didn't have very good camp skills in scouts, right? So the bully made it about me, and that's what bullies do. They make it about us, so we take it personally. And the number one thing to realize is, the number one things to realize is actually it's about them. Bullies have been through trauma, or bullies are feeling insecure, and bullies have learned to bully because they've become victims, and they take it out on us. It's not, they make it about us when it's about them. And the second thing about bullies is, or reacting to bullies, is to realize that feelings are an inside job. They come from within us, and they don't come from the outside world. So, so much talking about triggering. I get it, and feelings are an inside job. Most of the time, we're not choosing how we're feeling as human beings, and that's okay, because if we're not choosing how we feel, it's not our fault.
Absolutely. Well, with that being said, where can people find out more about you and your podcast, and what's next for you? Is there anything more in the works for you other than the podcast, or taking your experiences into a book of any sort, or is it more just you love the podcast, you love guesting, and where can people find you?
So they can Google Thriving Adoptees, or they can put Thriving Adoptees into the Apple search bar or Spotify or wherever they get their podcast. Thriving Adoptees. Lots, as you said, 176 episodes. Lots on there. Mainly some for adoptees, mainly for adopted parents. What's next for me? More speaking engagements. More speaking. I'm not writing a book yet. I did start a book last year. I started it 3 times. I got to 10,000 words each time, around that, and I felt, I realized one day on the back of something that somebody said to me that I actually prefer talking to writing. And everybody says, well, once you've got a book, you've got to get out there and promote it, and you've got to, and so the books don't sell themselves. So I figure I prefer talking to writing at the moment. I'm sure it'll change. I will write a book at some stage, but
I will look forward to that day when it does. And if you make it stateside for any of those speaking engagements, I would love to connect with you as well. And I just hope our magic continues. And it was just so wonderful speaking with you and having you on today. And just wish you nothing but the best, continued success as you approach 200 episodes, and then 276 and 376 and however many you keep going. I just really love the resource that you provide and all the different amazing guests you've had on there so far. I know you've had some regarding foster care and infertility and so many the different things that is kind of the space that I'm moving into to occupy. So it's great seeing some of the potential out there with someone that's been doing it like you have and hitting it hard for the last year and a half. So thank you for that. And thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, Dustin. It's been a delight.
Thank you. And for everyone else, like Simon said, just look into who you are, discover that first. That's the biggest part. And from there, that will be your compass on where you want to go with your life as an adoptee, as an adopted, whatever it may be, because we're born into our names, but we become family by heart.